It's good to see everyone this morning. Appreciate your being here. I know we have several out of town, several traveling that not able to be here, so remember them for safe return home. Also, a reminder that a week from this coming Friday, I believe that's the 27th, the reunion at Fort Hill. I think those activities kick off at noon on Friday, go through Friday night, Saturday, and then there's some things even on Sunday. But it reminds you of that. If you get an opportunity to go down, there's a schedule and description of the activities on the table in the foyer out there. And, of course, Bill can give you information. And I think Bill is still recruiting some people to help with some of the activities. So if you might be able to help with that, I know Bill would appreciate the help. Leave your Bibles open, if you would, to the text that was read for us from Matthew chapter 5. You know, the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew is generally considered by most Bible students to be the greatest sermon ever delivered. And of course that's understandable. It's expected because it was delivered by the greatest preacher, the greatest teacher who ever lived. Certainly everything that Jesus had to say, everything that he taught was great. And yet this particular sermon has gone down in history, so to speak, as being perhaps the greatest, at least the most memorable to most people. It's amazing. There are certain passages of Scripture that are known to people who don't even have a Bible knowledge. They may have never read the Bible, but it's amazing how many people, if you mention the prodigal son, they're familiar with the prodigal son. If you mention the Sermon on the Mount, they remember that Sermon on the Mount. They may not can tell you anything about it, but they know what you're talking about. If you talk about others, such as the Good Samaritan, almost universally known, even by those with little Bible knowledge. And the Sermon on the Mount is much like that. And as you study chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew, you cannot help but be impressed with the eloquence and the beauty of this discourse, the common sense, if you will, which comes out. Now you've got to understand that Jesus is speaking to a Jewish audience here. A Jewish audience who still followed and accepted the law of Moses as it had been given back in Exodus 20. And yet they had so perverted, they had so corrupted the law of Moses to the point that it's not even recognizable in their lives. And for that reason, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus frequently says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said," and then he would go on to say, "But I say unto you." And if you look at what he said, they had heard said, it was not what the law of Moses taught. It was what their rabbis, what their teachers, their scribes had perverted the law of Moses to make it say. And so Jesus is not changing the law of Moses there. He's simply going back to the original, the original intent there, as opposed to how they have perverted and corrupted it. Over the years, there have been many great lessons that have been taught, Bible classes, sermons, lectureships from this text of Matthew chapter 5 through 7. But obviously, you can't cover all of that in one lesson. So this morning, I want us to look at chapter 5, verses 14 through 16, the text that was read for us just a few moments ago, and emphasize some of the lessons there. But notice, before actually getting into that text, if you back up and look at verse 13 there, he refers to his disciples as the salt of the earth. He describes them here as the light of the world. And using these expressions, he is showing the necessity of commitment, the importance of commitment to his cause. And as children of God, as followers of Christ, we must be very careful that we do not lose our savor, the King James says. Some translations use the term saltiness. And he points out that when salt has lost its savor, when salt is no longer able to influence the taste of food, when it's no longer able to preserve meat as it was used in years past, it's worthless. It's only fit to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. And so we must not lose our savor. We must not lose our saltiness, nor, he says, should we hide our light, in order that God may be glorified. Remember, this is our purpose of existence, is it not? Even in the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 7 has something to say in this regard. And I'm reading from the New King James here in Isaiah 43. For everyone that is called by my name, whom I have created for my glory. Notice, God says he created us for his glory. I have formed him, yes, I have made him. I want to begin our study, first of all, by noticing the importance of letting our light shine. The importance of letting our light shine is actually twofold, at least from this text. First of all, we obviously do it. Why? Because the Lord commands it. Anything that Jesus said we should do, we must do. It's not a matter of why, Lord. I don't see the importance of this, Lord. The fact that he said to do it makes it important. But secondly, we need to let our light shine because of the stakes that are involved. Think about it. The souls of our children, the souls of our friends, of our neighbors, of our co-workers, our relatives, the souls of the people we know are at stake. Because as we've talked about in other lessons, we're all going to spend eternity in one of two places. We're either going to spend eternity in heaven with God and Christ and the Holy Spirit and all of the saved, or we're going to spend eternity in a devil's hell with all of the lost of all the ages. And so everyone we know, it doesn't matter who they are, how well we know them, everyone we know is going to spend eternity in one of those two places. What's going to determine where they spend eternity? Well, obviously their obedience to the gospel, at least those of our generation, those this side of the cross of Christ. Whether they obey the gospel of Christ or whether they refuse to obey the gospel of Christ, that's the determining factor. And so as we look at our loved ones, our neighbors, our co-workers, are they saved or are they lost? And if they are lost, can we do something about it? Do we at least try? And part of the way that this is accomplished is by letting our light shine. And if we fail to let our light shine, if we fail to show them the way of Christ, if we fail to show them the superiority of the Christian life by our example, we have failed. And we will give an account for this in the day of judgment. It should be the desire and the goal of should be the desire and the goal of every child of God to let his light shine to the very best of his ability. And yet, sadly, many Christians are embarrassed, ashamed, whatever you want to call it, but they don't want to let their light shine. You know, at work, they don't want people to know that they're a Christian. Or at school, they hide the fact that they believe in God, that they believe in the Bible, that they follow the teachings of Christ. Oh, it's fine to wear religious t-shirts. You know, you see people, but that doesn't say anything. That's not really letting our light shine. We let our light shine by the way that we talk, the things that we do, the way that we treat others, the way that we conduct ourselves. That's all a part of letting our light shine, letting people see Christ living in us. And when people look at us on the job, when they listen to us talk, when they look at the way we dress, when they see the things that we do for fun, for recreation, when they see the way that we treat other people, what do they see? A bully? A party person? Someone who's only concerned about self? Or do they see the light of Jesus Christ reflected in that life? That's what this is all about. But what's the purpose? We've just been talking about the fact that we can lead others to Christ, but more specifically, what's the purpose of letting our light shine? If you look at verses 15 and 16 here of our text, Jesus makes it clear. He says, "Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick." We would say on a lampstand. "But on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Why do we let our light shine? Is it because we want people to look at us? Look at me. Look what I've done. Look what I'm doing. Look what a great person I am. Don't you wish you were like me? People don't say that, but many people do things for their own glory, to bring attention to themselves, to make them look good to the world. And there are those that every time they do a good deed, every time they do something nice, it's all about, see what I did. Whether it's helping someone in need or whatever we're talking about. And sometimes people become miffed. They become upset because nobody notices what they've done. And we've seen this in the Lord's church over the years. Somebody will do something perhaps around the building or something to help out, and nobody notices, nobody praises their efforts, and they become offended. People say, well, nobody noticed that I painted, nobody noticed that I did the flower bed, nobody noticed that I did whatever. And believe it or not, I've actually known people who quit attending services because nobody, and this was their expression, nobody appreciated what I did. Well, if they were doing what they did in order to receive praise and appreciation from men, they were doing it for the wrong reason. That's not the purpose of doing things. That's not the purpose of helping, to draw attention to self. You look at Jesus. The miracles of Jesus were frequently done before multitudes, but there were occasions when he did miracles almost in private, maybe just the apostles, sometimes 1 or 2, 3 people with him. Even the Lord did not do his works in order just to be praised and to be seen. We must do our works for the right reason. We must let our light shine for the right purpose. And when this happens, God sees. It doesn't matter if anybody in the congregation knows what I have done. It doesn't matter if anybody mentions it or says a word. Because God sees. He takes note of it. And in chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, Jesus deals with this very idea that God sees. He said, take heed that ye do not your alms. Now, alms is not a term that we use a lot today. The New King James simply calls it charitable deeds, and that's what it's talking about. When you do your charitable deeds before men to be seen of them, otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, charitable deed, do not sound the trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms or charitable deeds, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret. Notice the last part here of verse 4. And thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. It's not like we're losing our reward because nobody notices or nobody mentions it. He said God sees. God's taking note. And we will receive our reward. And this is why it's important that our good deeds be done through the church rather than some charitable organization. Yes, it's possible to do good through human organizations, but does God get the glory? You know, if we're going to do good, it ought to be through the church, or it ought to be done as an individual Christian, not through some other civic organization or social organization where God doesn't get the glory, God doesn't get the credit. At least something to think about. As children of God, we need to look for opportunities to do good. Again, not because of what it will do for me, not because of any praise or credit, but that God gets the credit. Someone says, wow, those people over there at the Alkire Road Church of Christ are good people. Let me tell you what they did for me. And this congregation is known for when there is, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a flood or other disaster, for helping. For years we had our clothing giveaway, and we were known as the congregation that gave away coats and clothes to families. We were known and are known as a congregation that does a lot of good things. And that's part of letting our light shine. And by the way, I should have mentioned this in the beginning. We not only can let our light shine as individual Christians, but what about letting our light shine as a congregation? You know, there's some congregations out there that just basically open the doors on Sunday. They close the doors Sunday night. They may open the doors on Wednesday, and that's about it. They don't do anything else. They're not involved in any kind of good works, any kind of charitable work, any kind of benevolent work. Absolutely nothing. And people usually know very little, if anything, about the Lord's church in that case. On the other hand, when a congregation like Alkire Road is very involved in disaster assistance or benevolence or other programs, as we've had over the years, people know it. People take note when they see the church's light shine. So keep in mind that we're talking about letting our light shine both individually and collectively. But let's move on and mention just quickly some ways that we can let our light shine. And again, there are more ways than we would even begin to think about trying to cover in one lesson. I do want to mention some just briefly, though. One of the best ways that we as children of God can let our light shine, that we can let our light shine before our family, before our friends, before our co-workers, before everyone. Very simple. By faithfully attending all of the services of the church. Not just because the Lord commanded it, Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25. Not just because it's part of seeking the kingdom first, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33. And certainly those are both very valid reasons for attending all of the services. But we should want to be here because we love the Lord. That's the bottom line. Not because it's a command, not because I've got to or I'm going to be lost. Or I've got to or the elders are going to send me a letter or somebody's going to come see me. We should be here because we love the Lord, and secondly, we should be here because we want to be strengthened and we want to be edified. What better place to grow in the faith? What better place to develop and to mature my Christian faith than around other Christians? By worshiping God in song, prayer, studying the Word together. All of these are reasons why we need to be here. You think of the message that we are sending to others when we willfully forsake the services of the church. What are we saying? Sometimes people say, oh, I'm not hurting anybody but myself. Are you sure? Our children are watching, whether they're young children or grown children. Other family members who may not be members of the church, they are watching. Our co-workers, they're watching, they know. Our neighbors know. What kind of message are we sending to them if they know that we willfully forsake the services of the church? You know, the fact of the matter is we're never going to convince others that the church is the most important institution in all the world. We're never going to convince others that we love the Lord, that we love the church, that we love His people when we willfully miss coming together as the Lord has commanded. What do our neighbors think when Sunday morning rolls around and they see our cars or trucks still in the driveway and they know it's time for Bible class or worship? They may not say it out loud, but they're going to at least think, well, church must not be very important to them. Especially if they see us in the yard doing other things or they see us other places. And yet Christians willfully forsake the service for family get-togethers. They forsake in order to travel. They volunteer for overtime at work, for school activities, for sporting events, for a whole host of things. How are we going to convince others that the church is important to us? This is not letting our light shine, brethren. Letting our light shine sometimes involves sacrifice. It means giving up something. It means foregoing something. But many Christians are not willing to pay that price, are they? But another way that we can let our light shine is by taking an active part in the work of the church. We just talked about attendance, and attendance is important, but you see, it's far more than simply being here and occupying a space in a pew. We've got to be involved in the work and the worship of the church. When we come together on Sunday morning, we don't just sit to be entertained, to listen. We're here to join our voices with others in praising God, to lift up our prayers to God, and to be edified by hearing His Word proclaimed and by observing the Lord's Supper and remembering the Lord's death, burial, and resurrection. But even that, when we leave the doors at 12 o'clock or whenever, when we leave this building, What are we doing? What should we be doing? We should still be involved in the work of the church. And that would include a whole host of things. It may be sending a letter to a sick or a shut-in. It may be visiting someone who is an erring member. It may be encouraging someone to come back who's fallen away. It may be trying to set up a Bible study with someone. Those are things that we need to be involved in. And when we do these things, we're letting our light shine not only before the community and before these people that we're visiting and doing things for, but we're saying, look, I'm serious about my commitment to Christ. What would you think about a young man who went out for football? And he told everybody, I want to play football. I want to play college football, and then I want to play pro football. And that was all he talked about. He wanted to play football. And then he goes out for the high school team, and the first day he shows up for practice, but he really doesn't do a lot. He just kind of stands around. The coach has to keep prodding. And the next day he doesn't show up, and he comes back the third day, and the coach says, where were you yesterday? Well, I had some things I wanted to do. And he misses over and over and over. And in the first game, he doesn't show up till halftime. Well, coach, I had my job down at McDonald's. And this went on all season. Would you think that young man was really serious about playing football? No. Would you think he had a commitment to that team, to that ball program? No. What about the Christian who exhibits the same actions toward attendance, toward work, toward involvement? Is he really committed to the church? Is he really committed to the cause of Christ? We would have to say no. When people see us only coming to services but never involved, never taking part in activities or programs of the church, what opinion do they have of us? But above all, we need to let our light shine before our families by living faithfully the Christian life. It's fine to attend the services. It's fine to be involved in visitation, the Monday night for the master program, or Lads to Leaders, or Vacation Bible School, or whatever program's going on. That's well and good. But those things don't mean a lot if we're not letting our light shine before our families. Some people walk in the door of the church building and they suddenly change. They become very pious and very godly and very loving and very kind. They go home and they take off that robe of Christianity and they become an old grouch. Not cooperative, not loving, not kind. Their children never see them pick up a Bible to study. They never hear them pray even at meal times. They never see them visiting the sick or the shut-ins or others. And those children grow up and they fall away. Or perhaps they're never baptized. And sometimes parents will say, I just don't understand why my child isn't interested in the church. Perhaps, not always. But perhaps it's because what they've seen or not seen in the home. In Revelation 2 and verse 10, the Lord says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried or tested, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Notice the last part of verse 10. But be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life. Faithfulness is key to living the Christian life, beloved. Faithfulness is essential if we're going to please the Lord. Just like that athlete, that young man that wants to play football, he's got to be faithful to practice, to games, to working out, to doing what he's supposed to be doing. Solomon says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Our children, our loved ones are going to be far more impressed by a godly example than simply by words telling them what to do. And I find it interesting as I look at Proverbs 22 and verse 6, Solomon doesn't say, teach a child the way he should go. He says, train a child. What's the difference? Teaching is talk. It's verbal. Training involves showing. When Urban Meyer gets in a group of new recruits, for spring training, and they go into the locker room there, and they used to use chalkboards when I was in school. Today they have the nice whiteboards and probably PowerPoints and other things. But he goes over there and he begins diagramming and showing plays for the offensive line. He begins to showing the defense. Here's what you do here. He's talking. That's teaching. And that's very important. But what would you think if all they did was look at films and look at that chalkboard and plays outline and they go out for the first game? Would they win? No. They've got to practice. They've got to put on the pads. They've got to get out there and hit one another. The quarterback needs to throw the ball. The receivers need to catch the ball. It's more than just teaching. Training involves hands-on experience. And so it is, Solomon says, with our children. Don't just teach them. Don't just tell them. You show them how they're to do it. God only knows how many people have obeyed the gospel because of a godly example, not only of a mother or a father or perhaps a grandparent, but they've seen the light of Christ in the life of someone else. And they obeyed the gospel. That's part of letting our light shine. I'm thinking of I started to say a young man. He's younger than I am, so I guess he's young. Stacy Searles is the offensive line coach for the University of Miami. Stacy's mom and dad were very faithful members of the church, and Stacy was and is a faithful member of the church. And he played for Auburn, bless his heart. But he was drafted by the San Diego Chargers, played pro for several years, and blew out a knee in one of the games and has been coaching now for several years. He coached at LSU. He's now with the University of Miami. But I say that because of this. Stacy Searles is a very faithful member of the church, and every week after practice he has Bible studies with his players. And he's baptized several of them. He makes no bones about it. Some of the other coaches and some of the players use profane language. You never hear Stacy using foul language. And his mother told me this. He didn't. His mother said, he tells his players, if you're going to play for me on Saturday, you're going to go to church with me on Sunday. And his whole line attends services with him, at least one service on Sunday. And he's baptized several of his players. Why? Because here's a man who's letting his light shine. And let's face it, football coaches and football players are not known to be religious people as a rule. But you see, here's a man, a very talented man, who's letting his light shine, who's doing good. And he doesn't make a big thing about it. In fact, much of what I know that Stacy does comes from his mother. She's very proud of him. She's a member of the church where Robbie Eversole preaches. Good man. Now, maybe we don't have the influence of a football coach or someone else, but we all influence someone, whether it's our children, whether it's our grandchildren, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a coworker. And oftentimes the people we influence the most, we may not even realize that we're influencing. And so we need to be aware. Let our light shine so that others can see our good works, not for us, but in other words, they see our light and God will have the glory. A couple of other passages before we close. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 18, John writes, "My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth." It's fine to talk and to plan and discuss, but it's more important that we put that plan into action. We all have different talents. We all have different abilities. We all have different circles of influence, people that we can reach. But if we all make a conscientious effort to let our light shine before the world, to be doers of the word and not hearers only, as James says in James chapter 1 and verse 22, then we can accomplish great things for the kingdom, beloved. You know, scientists tell us that it takes 1,936 minutes for a sound to reach the earth from the sun. And yet a ray of light can reach the earth from the sun in about 8 minutes. Why? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. Light travels much faster than sound. What are we sending out? Is it our light that's shining out? Or just our words? Just talk? Let us strive to do all things to the glory of God, regardless of whether it's taking part in the worship service, whether it's the things that we do during the week when we interact with others. But let us do all things for the glory of God. And let us strive to let our light shine in the coming week. This morning, if you're subject to the invitation of Christ, if you're not yet a Christian, you can become one. And that's the first step, becoming a child of God before you let your light shine, because that light is no good. It really serves no purpose if you're not a child of His. But come in faith, repenting of your sins, confessing His name, and being baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. Let Him add you to His body, the church, and begin faithfully living the Christian life, serving Him, as we've talked about this morning. If you need to respond to this invitation of Christ, why not come while we stand and we sing?